Hi, everyone. I'm here with Aaron Terrell, and he is a trans man, a transsexual man who he was. How do I word this? You were like one of the contributors to Gender Dysphoria Alliance, an organization that for the past few years was putting up basically science-based podcast, or at least you came back at it from a sort of scientific, truth-based perspective, trying to understand the scientific origins of gender dysphoria. And you brought on a bunch of heterodox array of thinkers. You were platforming a bunch of AGPs, which was cool, and even some AAPs. And Aaron's just been a really outspoken voice on Twitter, saying things that gets both like trans activists and gender criticals mad. So like when you're getting both factions mad, like it's you know like it's just heartwarming to see the way that Aaron tweets. So yeah, thanks for coming on my channel, Aaron.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. We can do the reverse of what we've done a few times, where I've had you on, asked you the questions, and yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm not as experienced as you are at it, but we'll see how it goes. I'm sure it's fine. Um, yeah, I guess to start with, um, I'm curious if you'd be interested in talking about how originally you didn't think that the concept of autoandrophilia applied to you, but then I think after reading my book and talking to other people, you started to think that that probably was the cause of your gender dysphoria.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So I transitioned many, like, 12 years ago now. I think it was. So it's been quite a while. Um, and I first encountered the concept of AAP a few years ago, and I wrestled with it. Like, I was like, does this apply to me? Because prior to transitioning, I definitely fit the AHE category, what Blanchard called the auto homoerotics, where I was kind of fixated on gay men and wanting to be one myself. Um, so that totally applied to me. But where where it got kind of tricky when I kind of encountered the concept of AAP, after learning about AGP, the problem is that post transition, not problem, but post transition, or with the addition of testosterone, let's say, my attractions switched from males to females, and I became exclusively externally gynophilic, so allogynophilic. And it never felt like meta attraction, because as I was learning about these concepts as they apply to AGP, I was like, does this map on to my experience? And I kept coming back with no, because well, for me, the idea of being male was not a sexual turn on. Like, it wasn't arousing. It was just the relief from what I've come to describe as autogynophobia, like fear or loathing of the self as female, um, or the aspects of me that are female. Um, so it was so the dysphoria, let's say, was always so much stronger than any associated euphoria. And so as other people have described AAP, such as those that you've had on your channel, especially Laura Reynolds, all of those others who identify with the concept of AAP, their experience of it is quite sexual. It's very much just the exact opposite, or the exact inverse of AGP. And for me, it was much more sentimental. I couldn't. So again, so torn on does it apply, because one thing that really is clearly AAP was an inability to differentiate who I was attracted to and who I wanted to be. So I couldn't. That was the exact same feeling of envy and attraction. Those feelings
Yeah.
were always identical for me, um, and that's what indicates AAP. But for me, again, it wasn't yeah sexual. It was very very sentimental, very romantic, and my dysphoria was strictly rooted in my body being female, and that I felt it needed to be male. But there was no kind of yeah again any sexual feelings in response to that. Um, but when I realized that well I never had a very high libido. I wasn't very like sex motivated.
Did you ever
Um,
have any gender euphoria experiences?
well, look, not like
Like, not euphemistically, but, like, you know what I mean? Like, when you get, like, like, if you got, like, warm, fuzzy feelings from, like, cross-dressing or maybe got, like, goosebumps or increased
yes,
heart rate or something like that?
yeah, well, yeah, a feeling of like excitement and relief, and just like yeah, I would say I definitely had that experience early on when I first started to try to present
Right,
male.
yeah.
Um, yes, it did, but the body stuff was always dysphoria. But yeah, there was a feeling of just absolute elation, like when I first started binding and things like that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I was
Hmm.
curious because I know that gender euphoria, it's often, like, for the first like, any person's, like, first exposure to various forms of stimuli, like, the first time binding, first time packing or whatever, it'll be, like, the most intense, and then it'll get milder over time, and so,
Hmm.
yeah, that's why I was wondering about
Hmm.
early on because I think, like, you probably don't notice it anymore, but, like, early on, um,
Yeah,
it's quite
yep,
noticeable.
for sure, for sure. Yep. Um, oh, what else was I saying? Oh, but yeah. So what I've come to kind of suspect is that um, the the reason it's so like subdued, let's say, in myself is again just because my sex drive wasn't, I wasn't very very sexually motivated, and I was much more kind of like I had a very very femme brained, let's say, experience of AAP, and I think most of the people who identify AAP in themselves um, are they do so because they do have like high libidos and it's easily identified as an aspect of their sexuality. It's not ambiguous in any way about that. Whereas, and I think that's how of
I think
course
that's more
most
true for AGPs too,
for
like, if
sure
it's
for
just, like,
sure
overtly
yeah
sexual. Yeah.
yep yep um, and so I think yeah so that's because again AGPs are male and they're going to have a higher sex drive, but I think in again the few females who do identify AAP in themselves, they're going to uh, yeah they're the ones who have yeah that really kind of uh, yeah more male typical male sized libido, and I certainly didn't. Um, but yeah, so if you could kind of just like take the concept of AGP and and like remove from it that kind of male sexual compulsion, and instead insert it with like the kind of yeah femme-brained sentimental
Right, a
stuff.
femme-brained version of AGP.
Exactly. Yep. You're going to get what I experienced. Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what I
No,
what I kind of ultimately concluded.
I think that, like, just with homosexuality, like, how gay men and lesbians, manifest their sexuality so different, for example, gay men have, like, a body count that heterosexual men envy, and
Right.
and and there's that joke about lesbians, like, driving a U-Haul to the second date,
Right.
like, there's clearly sex differences in homosexual expression, but it's, like, still homosexuality, and I think the same applies here with autoheterosexuality, where the AGPs are gonna be, on average, more male typical in how they express it, and the AAPs are gonna be more female typical, but
Hmm.
it's, like, ultimately, like, the same underlying structure of thought about wanting to be the other sex, like, being the other sex is good, my own
Hmm.
sex traits are bad, envying attracted people of the other sex, just the overall, like, erotic target identity inversion, like, thought structure, it seems to
Hmm.
be the same.
Yep. Exactly. I agree. It's um, and I think you and I are in agreement on this as well about the overlap in auto autosexuality and autism spectrum disorder. Like you were saying, I was
Yeah, I often
watched
point out that they start with the same root word.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, yep. And you're kind of saying that it is whatever that mechanism that kind of turns one towards like like kind of an inward focus could also be the same thing that's causing that erotic identity inversion. And I think that's accurate, just because again the separating A asterisk P and ASD seems really difficult because uh, all the AAPs that you've had on, those are the three of your
The 3 I've had on, yeah, are
yeah, yeah,
autistic. Yeah, though there's
yep,
incredible overlap here.
yep, yep, incredible. Yep. And I think I'm probably on the spectrum, but no, not nearly as much as they are. And I'm wondering again if that as a version of the intensity as well. I'm not sure if there's any correlation there, but there could be.
Right, yeah, I don't think it hasn't been studied yet, so we don't have any, like,
Yeah.
quantitative
No.
knowing of this yet. We're just kind like me and you kind of we haven't really done the number crunching. We just look at the things like I imagine you have probably looked at a lot of Reddit posts and to like sort of see how people think and talk.
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah. And
I've
just
been
intuitively
yeah.
crunching all these different anecdotes as if they are data points, but it's just, yeah, we don't have the actual data to show for it.
Right, but
But
it's
just,
like
yeah, the anecdotes add up.
they do. I do think though even though I have been primarily doing the qualitative sort of investigating, I think there's a risk with this thing where much more risk of like unconscious bias focusing on certain things, making narratives too quick before, based on
Yeah.
little cases. And so like I do try to be cautious about what I know, just because I haven't been staring at a bunch of like scatter plots and running correlations and such. Um,
Wise. Yeah.
but yeah, but I think the study of autogynephilia began with case studies. Hirschfeld and Ellis, they introduced case studies, and they didn't know it was autogynephilia at the time, but now we can clearly see what it is. And so I think what I'm trying to do with this channel is also contribute to adding case studies to people's awareness, because that is where, since that's where the study of AGP started, seems like a perfectly fine point to start with AAP.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
With your experience of you mentioned that early on you had some gender euphoria, and that it was hard to differentiate between attraction and envy. Um, I'm curious, have you had experienced any of some of the other phenomenological sort of indicators of autosexuality? That, for instance, like sometimes I've talked about like mental shifts or phantom penis or things like that.
I think I maybe have like I'm gonna say no. Like I was wondering about like the whole phantom penis thing. I don't think that I have ever experienced that, and I know I haven't experienced mental shifts. I don't relate with that at all. I can't even. Yeah, for me, it was just like I felt like I was always supposed to be male, and then I just brought my body in line with what my brain thought should be the case, but I don't. Um, yeah, I've never experienced that where it's just like this kind of subconscious, like my mental state shifts, or yeah.
Okay,
For
yeah,
me,
no,
that,
but
that
I figured I'd ask because like
yeah,
it doesn't seem it seems to only happen in a subset of people,
okay,
but
yeah,
yeah, it as far as I could tell, like the mental shift stuff seems to be like that tangible sense of cross gender identity of like say like if a trans man says like I just like feel on the inside like a man, like they just know they have a strong feeling. I think like that's what they're pointing to. Um,
okay,
it doesn't sound like when you've described your experience, it doesn't sound like you had the conviction that you were a man, more that like you wished you were, or that
right,
it distressed you to be female.
right. Right, exactly, yes. Yeah, it was very much that I knew that I was female, but I wished I were male, but I had a very difficult time conceiving of myself as female. Like, I know this is objectively true, but it's 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 difficult to process. I don't know. Um, uh, but then, yeah, I think it was all three of the AAPs you've had on they've had this experience where it just like it's like a shift in their. No, Laura hasn't had that experience because I remember talking about it with her early on when you first raised the concept of those mental shifts, and it wasn't something that she'd experienced either. But
The one I
um,
just had on, Ashley, the
yeah,
I, th- I think she had.
I don't think you're supposed to say her name.
No, I that was the name I wrote on the.
Oh, never mind. Okay, whoops. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
thought it was uh, an anonymous person.
You're thinking of something else.
Oh, okay, never mind. All right, carry on.
Yeah. um. Yeah, I forgot what I was gonna say.
Oh yeah, but yeah, mental shifts. It's like, and excuse me, another mutual of ours who identifies with the AAP category. She experiences those mental shifts as well, and she's and just like one of the other AAPs you had on, they say they experience as like this shift in suddenly they become more confident and like energetic and kind of like feeling like this vitality or something.
Yeah.
It's completely foreign concept to me. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. I was yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I I believe that you didn't have it based on, like, what you said. I'm curious, um, in terms of, like, your theory crafting, I know that before you made a video about, like, the lesbian to gay trans man pipeline, and I was wondering if you might wanna talk about that for a bit here now that you've had, like, more time to, like, collect your thoughts and think about it more.
Yeah, I'm realizing that it all resides in meta attraction. Um, so we anyone familiar with the concept of AGP is quite familiar with how meta attraction works and how someone with AGP will seek out male sex and romantic partners because that's how you can manifest your feminine um, persona. Um, And I believe that this is much more common in females than in males because female sexuality is just much more relationally driven and dynamic driven, and
Like,
less category
interpersonal,
specific.
basically.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah, and that's the category meta attraction falls under.
right, right, yep. And so I think that experience of meta attraction is going to be um, more front and center of the AAP experience than the AGP experience. Just again because it's so much so relationally interpersonally driven. And I realized while reading the original literature on the female to male transitioners, many of whom were actually pegged as being of the homosexual transsexual etiology. Um, in their own words, the way they describe their experience is first and foremost as a male identity. And it's almost like that their lesbianism is an extension of that male identity. And they talk about how, they don't like, uh, didn't have any interest in dating men just because they were averse to the dynamic of dating males. And there was no language about the target of attraction, about a gynophilic attraction. It's all very much about this kind of this male identity. And so I believe for many of those early butch lesbians that were categorized as homosexual, transsexual, it was because the Blanchard, in particular, kind of took them at their word of being homosexual and assigned them the same as the male homosexuals. But I don't think that's what he was witnessing. I think what was actually going on there was a lesbian identity that was an extension of a male identity, and that male identity um, uh, being the result of autoandrophilia. And this is becomes especially evident when they start taking testosterone, and so many of them decide that they're bisexual or exclusively gay, and started dating men, um, which was incredibly common, and lamented within the lesbian community of the flight of the butches, just because I think, yeah, essentially what the lesbian relationships or what the lesbian community had been providing for them, which was the ability to enact a male persona, was no longer necessary once they had manifested that masculinity
Right, it
physically.
became optional because they had other options at that point. Like,
Right.
they
Yep.
could be with a man and still feel masculine because,
Right.
like, their voice would be masculine, the guy would be attracted to them looking like a man, it would all work that way.
Yep. Yep.
Um, something I wanna mention in terms of my, like, sort of hypotheses about why, why back in the '80s, '70s, and such, sexologists may not have noticed that some of these could be AAP, is that back then they used to ask in terms of, like, asking about cross-gender eroticism, they thought of it they thought of it in relation to cross-dressing usually. So, they would ask,
Hmm.
like, they'd ask the male patients, "Have you been aroused by cross-dressing?" And, of course, most of them say yes, right? At least the autogynephilic ones. But if they ask that of the females, um, I think they virtually never said yes. And like, I think part of this is because I suspect autoandrophiles are less likely to be aroused by cross-dressing compared to AGPs. And also, since since they don't have a penis, they don't have basically this, like, blaring signal, that like, this unambiguous signal that you're experiencing physical arousal. Like, I I'm not saying that, like, women can't tell when they're aroused. I'm just saying that, like, sometimes with the sort of arousal from, say, like, autogynephilia, it's like it can almost seem like just a physical reaction of the body, but, like, mentally it's not arousing, you know?
Hmm.
And so I think I suspect that, um, even if some of them were aroused by cross-dressing, they wouldn't have noticed that within themselves, that response happened.
It's possible, but I think what's more likely going on is that, um, I just don't think female sexuality is usually, it's the word has a negative connotation, but I mean, um, is not fetishistic. So, like, objects, clothing being one of those, is not going to trigger an arousal response in a female the way it would in a male. Um, but like, if you were to ask about maybe a partner referring to them with masculine terms in a sexual
Right,
context,
yeah.
that's going to be where the arousal comes from, right? It is going to be that interpersonal dynamic that's telling them that they're male, rather than objects. And there was a study, where they asked gay men and then gay FTMs, and this was years ago, so we can virtually conclude they were AAP and not socially contagious, uh, 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 gay trans men. But so heterosexual females who transitioned, and actual homosexual males, and the homosexual males were 10 times more likely to report arousal to male clothing,
Oh, yeah.
which,
Y
it
You're talking
checks
about the
out.
2009 Bochting and Coleman study, like, the
I
gay
think
and
so.
bisexual trans men?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep. 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 And
yeah.
so I think that those trans men in that study, there's pretty much no way they weren't autoandrophilic. But it's not going to be the clothes that's arousing. It's going to be affirmation in an interpersonal dynamic. Yeah, my suspicion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would also suspect that too, and, like, that of course, if that was the case, that was happening, it's unlikely that the sexologist would have picked up on that,
Hmm.
and I can recall from reading some of the old stuff from the 60s and 70s, the writing about the transsexuals, when they were talking about the female to male transsexuals, they often described them as they were very butch or like stone butch. You know, they
Hmm.
didn't like being touched during
Hmm.
sex. They only liked being assertive and performing like the male sexual role.
And isn't that kind of obvious what that entails? I don't know. I'm. It's not fair, you know, like with the information that we have now, to kind of judge
Right,
in
it's
the
not.
past. But I mean, but I mean, if somebody is averse to, I mean, why would a homosexual woman be adverse to her genitals being touched by her partner unless it was because it reminded her she's
Yeah,
female?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's plausible. I think it's plausible that some homosexual transsexuals would have difficulties with being touched in particular ways for reasons I don't quite understand because it's not the type I understand very well. But
Fair.
you know, like there's probably some like HSTS among trans women that don't like having their genitals incorporated into sex, but um,
That's usually because it infers that their partner isn't straight, and that's the turnoff, not a dysphoric response, is what I understand.
yeah, yeah, I'll have to defer to you on that one. I don't like to speak too authoritatively about the HSTS because like I don't get it in terms of like it's alien to my experience, and also it seems like there's so much more. The vast majority of the writing about transsexualism seems to be about the autosexual type, even if they don't know what they're looking at.
Mhm.
You know?
Yep, yep. Well, I defer to your humility, and I hope to absorb some because I have gotten plenty of yeah, yeah. I need to work on the definitiveness with which I
Right. Yeah, I mean, you do sometimes make some very strong statements without the caveats that help
yes,
allow
yeah,
for other
yep,
options.
yep.
Um, yeah, like if you were to guess among the trans man population today in terms of let's say just the ones that have gone on testosterone or like maybe among the ones that have gone testosterone and mastectomy, like basically like the equivalent of post-op, so to speak. Um, like what do you think the etiological breakdown of that population is between like the HSTS, the autosexuals, and then potentially the trenders slash ROGD?
Well, I think the vast majority of female to male transitioners are of the ROGD type. I believe that for most, it's an extension of a commitment to social justice, um, and not a reflection of an orientation or or paraphilia or however you want to.
You think
Um,
it's like the vast majority? I mean, verbally, like that sounds like if I were to translate that to a number, I would think like at least 70%. Like,
yeah, yes,
eh,
yes, I believe that's true.
you think it's that
Yeah,
high, like 2/3 of them? I see
yes,
why you're alarmed about it then. Like,
right, right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's what I've been observing for years now. Um, and and only when I um, learned about the, you know, kind of fully came to understand AAP, I can see it in a lot of the influencers, but many of the influenced, not so much. So like your uh, uh, it's not me. Yeah, it's probably not fair to name names, but a lot of the FTM influencers, you can clearly see just in their histories and their behavior that that they seem to be performing masculinity for their own benefit. Right? It's just kind of
I've personally
let's
gotten that vibe from it. I don't look too much at their videos, um, but I have heard that it's quite a big scene on YouTube, the trans mask like influencer
yeah,
thing.
yeah, big time. And I think a number of the kind of the stealthy true trans, true transsexual, true scums, I think I think those people are those FTMs are by and large autoandrophilic, um, uh, because again, I think for females, that experience is going to manifest much more as dysphoria than euphoria, and they're, for the same reason that AAGPs do, they're going to latch onto this whole uh, brain body mismatch thing, and and choose to interpret their experience as some kind of mental, some sort of medical disorder, because that's validating. I used to be there, so I know, but uh, the majority are anti that medical outlook, anti kind of being just blending in as a man, and are pro kind of queering the binary. Um, so are transitioning out of a desire to kind of, like the whole gender fuckery thing. It's like it's moral and good to not fall into the gender binary, is how this works. There's social incentive to not belong to the oppressor class, and when you're a cis straight white girl, as most of the transitioners are, being trans, medicalizing even just to a little bit is the way to rid yourself of the original sin of being cishet, and to gain oppression points, to have a voice at the table, and to basically to just be pure and righteous and worthy of compassion and respect, because cishets certainly aren't in this worldview. So I think I feel like you and a lot of the other more, and even like some of the other more male-brained AGP or AAPs don't seem to get this. They don't seem to get how socially and ideologically influenced most adolescent girls are, and not very sexually motivated.
Well, I mean, I would say that at least I do agree that there are quite a few young women that are very concerned about not being classified as an oppressor. Um, I've seen it, like they feel like self-conscious about being white and like being cis, and they don't want to be one of the bad person, and so I can see that. It's just still, it's so hard for me to imagine someone like getting double mastectomy so that you're not an oppressor. Like that's such an intense intervention for it, which
Mm-hmm.
is why I like. I mean, personally, like I think most of the ones transitioning are AAP. Um, and
That's preferable to believe.
I mean, right, it's a happier possibility. I mean,
Yeah,
and it could also, these sort of different motivations we're talking about here, they can also intersect, like where if you do have gender issues, you're gonna be kind of like swept up into sort of the sort of leftist politics, and then also absorb that other feeling of not wanting to be an oppressor. So it's like kind of hard to cleanly separate the groups,
true,
I think.
true. Yeah, just like how I've been talking about how the boys, what a lot of people call the rapid onset gender dysphoric boys, are actually, they that AGP is kind of a spectrum, and so even if they just have a little whiff of it, but they get all this social credit for being a trans woman versus being a straight white boy, there is an external social incentive to embrace the AGP, and so I think that is also happening. Yes, probably with uh, uh, some females where they might just have a little bit of an inkling of AAP, and but the social reward that comes with the trans identity is the greater drive. I think, I just don't think. It's hard to pick apart, but just by how much time I've spent in FTM communities listening to them, it's very clear that for so many there is no gender dysphoria. There's just a need to be in the rainbow club, and that is how you do it. And a lot of times dysphoria is created after the fact, because what happens is they'll like identify as a trans boy and then kind of take on that whole avatar of the cute boy, and then when that is in like when their kind of online avatar conflicts with their actual body, that can develop dysphoria that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So I think the adopting the ideology, and it's kind of like, I need to be trans to have social credit. If I'm trans, then I need to feel like I should be male. And so it's this kind of like each one just generates the next. And I think too, what you were saying about the you can't imagine somebody going that far, but how it works is a lot of times it's like a conveyor belt. It's like, okay, I'm trans, so I do
Right,
this.
it's like a pipeline thing.
Yeah. And then it's like, at what point do I say I regret this and get off of it? And yeah, and with each step
Right, because you're
doing that becomes
basically
more harder.
like, if they were motivated by social reasons to do it, then it would be extra horrifying to them to have to be
Bingo.
ostracized by the social scene, right? Like,
Right.
they're caring about all that social stuff, clearly.
Right. Right. What's worse than
Um,
being a detransitioner in those groups, you know?
right, I do agree that, like, these social forces are definitely there. I really wish this was getting studied better. Like, I wish almost that, like, all that, like, transsexualism was provided was, like, allowed, like, people could do the transition, but that it was, like, centrally recorded, and so that all the data was in, so that we could know the true rate of regret, the true rate of, follow through. Because, like, right now, the data is just it's not good, and it's hard to know
Yeah.
what's happening, and it's just in lieu of that scientific evidence, there's just political factions fighting over it and making a culture war instead of using science to create knowledge that can help these people that are suffering.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And I think there's a lot of fear on the part of an insecurity on the part of the people who are providing this healthcare. And I think they intentionally don't do the follow up just because I think they know the data is not gonna reflect in their favor.
Yeah, it's yeah, I
Well,
understand why you've had so much concern about the whole medical scene here.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And another thing, just what you said about following up, like who, um, find getting data on who regrets, etc. I think that is such a tough question because for so many people, I think Stella and Sasha had a really good conversation about this on Gender a Wider Lens. It's like when you make a decision that you can't go back from, a lot of people just work that into their new identity, right? Like it's a mental protective measure to not to not allow yourself to fully feel the regret. It's just you kind of just make sense of it in a much more um, in a more self-protective way, and so you reframe, minimize, etc. And I think that's probably healthy because again, you can't undo it, but but it's not going to reflect it's not going to reflect the reality on the ground, and it's not going to protect further future people from going down that path unnecessarily.
Right, like yeah, and honestly, it's so hard to quantify regret, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's so, like, that's probably not even the right construct to think about it, but it maybe if instead it was thought of in terms of, like, whether it was, like, necessary in hindsight or whether they probably could have made it without it, like, maybe that sort
yeah,
of thinking.
yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
yeah, I'm curious, are there any other aspects of your experience with autoandrophilia that you haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah. So, um, one thing that I think is interesting, kind of unique to me, or not unique to me. It's just I'd
No,
say
you're
like just in the
unique, Aaron.
context.
Don't put yourself down.
Oh,
You're
thank you.
special.
No, like when as far as like other people who have as far as the other FTMs or dysphoric females who's speaking about AAP, is that I my gynophilia is um, front and center and was non-existent prior to testosterone, and I feel like this is really interesting, and I'm curious about it. I'm curious if other people have had this experience. So, any you else other AAPs out here who have transitioned, let me know what your experience is with this, because so far it seems like most go in the other direction, as long as the theory holds up that the butch lesbian to gay trans man pipeline theory is correct. So many go from being attracted to women to being attracted to men with the addition of testosterone, and mine went in the other direction. And of course, we can say that that is meta attraction, and I've certainly explored that. I've realized that my attraction to like highly feminine women who are much smaller than me is definitely a product of meta attraction.
Yeah.
That like I've realized that that's pretty evident now when I thought about it. But my primary attraction is to, well, of course, my partner, but other, let's say, AFAB, uh, um, not quite people like me, because I don't like it's
Basically
like
pre-T,
yeah, or
like
even a little bit, but just like it's very much so my what feels like the most genuine and like base attraction is kind of like um a uh, a homosexual attraction to fellow masculine females. um uh, but and that it doesn't feel, there's nothing meta about it. It's very much their you know uh, bodies that I'm attracted to. But I do like the kind of like tomboy aesthetic or so, and that attraction is very much not meta. It's not self-referential, but it does seem to be. It does seem like it would be an extension of my AAP, right? Because it's yeah, I
right.
don't
It
know. I
almost
don't know.
sounds it sounds I would say like almost analogous to like if GAMPs were to be attracted to each other.
Right, right.
Right?
Which
Like it's
and they are
basically T for T
right.
in a way, but like where the other person, like in your case you're saying the other person, you don't want them to be as masculine as you.
Right, right. Yeah. So I guess there is a bit of meta there, in that I do
Yeah.
need to perceive them as more feminine than myself. Um, but uh, yeah. But anyway, I just think that's really really interesting. That yeah. Oh, and another why I think this is so tied to testosterone is that when I was on half the normal dose, which is what I started on, I essentially was bisexual for that period. And this is only something I realized a couple of years ago. In hindsight, is that once that dose was doubled in 2017, that's when all of my lingering androphilic attractions disappeared. Um, so I find that yeah equally interesting.
Yeah,
How it's yeah
that
my
is weird. Cause
yeah it seems to
cause
be a
it's
direct
yeah, it sounds like the opposite pattern from like the butch lesbian to gay trans man pipeline.
right right
But yeah, meta
yep
attraction, it just seems so unpredictable where it's almost there's almost like kind of a risk that like too much is being trying to be explained with meta attraction. Cause like but on the other hand, it's it does seem to account for the sexual orientation changes in transitioners.
mm-hmm mm-hmm yep yeah the Kevin does seem to be one AGP who is uh, uh, genuinely bisexual. I found that quite interesting. Like he dated men and women, and then when he came up with the idea, or when he learned about the concept of pseudo bisexuality, he like employed it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's nice," but it's not how he actually typically related with, like in a male male relationship, which I found quite fascinating. I'd never heard of, yeah,
Yeah.
bisexuality in AGPs existing independent of the meta. Um, but I think just in females, it's always going to be much more fluid and loose, and again, less category specific. Just again because um, that's how our sexuality is. Um, but yeah, I do see
Right. I mean,
parallels.
yeah, there's that general pattern that it is more fluid. Um, at least, yeah, with unmasculinized females, because like the homosexuals have greater rigidity,
Yep.
and they and this has been measured in the lab, and it seems to match up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've
Yep.
actually
But it's just
wondered.
making the mistake of assuming that any woman who identifies as homosexual being in that category. That's
Yeah,
the mistake.
something I've wondered with regards to this erotic target identity inversion theory in females is that with the whole idea of female sexual fluidity, it's like they don't have like a clear specific erotic target in mind, so it could be anything. And so I wonder, like, since the specific erotic target is sort of an independent aspect from the location aspect, whether it's pointed outward or inward, I wonder if some of the, like, I think you see with a lot of gender variant females that they're not so rigid about trying to be like a binary trans man, and they're all over the place. And I wonder if some of this is just that fluidity, like if that gets reflected inward, that they would, you know, not mind, like they'd be more comfortable with a wider array of gender expressions just because they don't have such a crystallized erotic target, if that makes any sense.
It sort of makes sense, but I think what you're looking at is you're looking at ideological trans and putting a sexuality motivation onto them, um, eh, eh, perhaps, because I find the ones that kind of seem to fit the the AAP theory most clearly are the ones who are very uh, um, insistent on their kind of like masculine presentation. Um, the I guess can you give me an example? Because what I see in the
Like,
ones,
do you know like the FTM femininity subreddit, for example?
yes, yes,
Like
yes.
that sort of thing where
See, and what that is to
yeah.
me is does that count as a caveat to me? I'm trying here,
It's
but
an improvement, right? Yeah.
is these are normal, regular, heterosexual, naturally feminine women who have adopted a trans identity for reasons other than their sexuality. They don't have an internal drive to manifest masculinity. They aren't naturally masculine. They just have to be FTM. Um,
Yeah. Some of
you,
them are on T though,
yeah,
at least,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they
and so
seem to
so
enjoy it. Like I've seen a lot of them say like that they didn't feel comfortable dressing in women's clothes until after they had masculinized.
right, right, because because their femininity is no longer toxic if they're a trans man. So they 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 see being feminine, just being a normal feminine woman, as upholding the cishet patriarchy, right? So they are complicit in upholding the cishet patriarchy by just being their natural feminine, attracted to men self. But as soon as they
Right.
take testosterone, they've queered the patriarchy. They're registering their descent, and now they can be their natural feminine selves because they've masculinized to a certain degree. They've they've done their part in, yeah, queering the binary.
See, Yeah, it's interesting how we view it through our different lenses because, like, when I see that same thing, I see it as, like, the ultimate the ultimate, like, validation of their maleness. Like, that would be very satisfying to an autoandrophile if they could dress in women's clothes and then still be seen as a man. Like, that's extra, like, confirmation of their manliness where, like, they're seen as a man regardless of what they're wearing.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
So, yeah, I guess time will tell which
But
of our lenses is more correct. I hope mine is just because it would be sad if so many people were transitioning who, may not benefit from it long term.
mhm, yeah, I also hope that you are correct. I just don't think you are. Anything else we need to cover?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like, because yeah, we didn't really plan this, we just set it up
Off the
today, and
cuff
we're
it.
just sort of hit play, and we're just winging it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, is there anything regarding, like, the gender critical movement that you wanna talk about? Or, I
Um,
saw that, like, that breath. Yeah.
yeah, I just saw so much faith and so much hope at the fallout from Denver. Um, that yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I just think in a lot of cases, like the the feminists who are much of the thought leaders behind the GC movement, um, uh, just just are really allergic to the sexology of it all.
Yeah.
And I think, and one of the reasons I believe that um, is because a lot of them are from the lesbian community, and I think a lot of them um, have seen in their own community um, that those AAP behaviors that I've been talking about, and that Stella briefly touched on, that caused that
Oh,
hoopla a
yeah,
few
when
months
they get a bit
ago.
of charge she said,
Yeah,
like, they got a bit
yep,
of
yep,
charge out of wearing some pants or
yep,
something.
yeah. Get a
Yeah.
sexual charge out of a masculine presentation, and they lost their shit. And I don't know. For me, a telltale sign of insecurity is that over the top emotional reaction, and it just seems to confirm rather than uh, uh, reject the point being made. Um, but I think that there is a lot of yeah, kind of fear. Um, they need AGP because for so long AGP's been the scapegoat, right? Of the
Right.
whole
I think they don't
trans
want there to
issue.
be a female analog because it would complicate their analysis.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, there's that. There's also they don't want there to be female analog. Yes, because yeah, that whole it upsets the kind of victim
Yeah,
predator kind of
the
worldview.
oppressor logic, like,
Yeah,
they're doing a different kind of woke because the radical feminism is descended from Marxism too, so it still does the
right.
oppressor-oppressed dynamic.
Yep, yep, exactly. And and they really like they want to cling to the autism. It's funny when they want to cling to the autism. Like there's all these autistic kids who are being victimized by this, but then they're terrified to acknowledge, uh, you know, the autism a autosexuality overlap, and just kind of trying to do these desperate psychobabble like
Yeah, but they
rebrands of
talk
it.
about yeah, they'll talk about the gay kids and the autistic kids being trans, and they recreate the typology,
Right.
basically.
Right. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
they just can't talk they're willing to talk about HSTS to some extent, but only in the frame of it being that they're being tricked into transing.
Right.
And then the autists are just, they're also just being
Hapless
taken
victims.
advantage of. Right,
Yeah.
and it's like, to some extent, I I I mean, I'm somewhat sympathetic to that in the sense that, like, I feel very strongly that people that are transitioning should know their etiology so that they can better predict whether it's the right choice for them. And so I do think there's something unfair happening here, and I would like to see the people who are transitioning, like, never feel like they got taken advantage of. Um,
Definitely.
but it's just it's so crazy to me to see the when gender criticals talk about all the autistic kids being transed, and it's like, well, the autistic trans, like, what type they probably are, and they're not connecting the dots, because
Yeah.
it complicates the narratives they've built up over the past 10 years or so of, like, autogynephiles are oppressing women, that they get off on violating women's boundaries and going in the bathrooms and all that stuff, and the idea that there would be some females who are motivated by something analogous, but
Or even
maybe.
teenage boys. They can't have that either.
Right, yeah, it it's it's like with the boys, once they get above a certain age, then they can be demonized, but when they're young, then they're just
Yeah.
hapless victims.
Yep.
Um, and it's sad for me to see because, like, I think both sides in this gender war, that the gender criticals and the trans activists, I think they they're all motivated by good intentions and they wanna improve things, but
Yep.
they're as far as I can tell, they're both building a different gender religion, and so there's these 2 gender religions going to war, but there's gender science is still absent from
Yeah.
this conflict, and
Yeah. Yeah, it
yeah,
does. It just feels like
it's
yeah, it feels like
troubling.
a new ideology, that does seem to kind of glorify, homosexuality as well,
Right,
and I think that's
yeah,
really problematic actually, because most of these kids aren't actually gay, but it seems to be this, yeah, this insistence that they are just because I think the alternative has been so vilified, so that leads to again, yeah, the glorification of and reverence for homosexuality, which is yeah, just seems bizarre because again, yeah, that's not what's going on. It's so completely out of touch with yeah, the kind of victimhood culture that we live in. You have to have you need to be oppressed in some way in order to have value, and and they're acting like sudden there's just this rampant homophobia that's causing all these gay kids to want to transition, and it's really not at all the case. It's uh, yeah, heterophobia that's driving all these, in my opinion, mostly in the case of the girls, um, uh, to need to have a queer identity, and if they were actually lesbians, they wouldn't need the trans thing because they'd already be in the rainbow club, um, by default of their sexual orientation. Um, uh, but yeah, it's just complete denial of the yeah again the yeah glorification of victimhood.
yeah, it's I really hope that the gender criticals, at least the liberal ones that can handle scientific findings and update their beliefs, I hope that they'll start, um, talking in a less demonizing way about autogynephiles, and because I think it's like, they have these like, there was that Lost Boys documentary, right,
Yeah.
where it's like, when I watched that and I'm like, every single one of these are autogynephilic etiology, and it only got brought up briefly, maybe for a couple sentences, and it's like, if you guys want, like, if you wanna actually make serious lasting change, it has to be in accordance with reality, your
Yeah.
beliefs, otherwise, it's going to get swept away when other moral fashions come around,
Hmm. Yep.
and
Yep. Yeah, they're trying to obscure um, the reality the same way that the trans activists are, because it's uncomfortable to look at it. But yeah, that in that documentary, at least 3 of those 5 has since publicly come forward and identified
oh,
themselves
nice.
as having AGP. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, um, so yeah, that's good. But yeah, it's just people were like, it's because it's been
Do you think
demonized so
any of them would
much.
like to come on here? Do you think any of them
Oh, I'm sure
I guess
Nyada. Yeah,
yeah, I
I
guess I
would
can
talk
ask
to.
you later to put me in touch with some that might be willing to talk about it.
Okay,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Yep. I know Enyata would. We've had him on Transparency. That's the one
Okay.
called "It's Okay to Be a Man." Um,
Okay.
yeah, I really like him. Yeah, and yeah, but anyway, I'll send you more details after.
Yeah. Sorry, I distracted your train of thought when I was like, "Oh, some of those people could come on."
No, no, you're good. You're all good. Yeah. Let's see. Oh yeah. So it's just a case of like because they've ingested this, that whole narrative of the yeah, dangerous fetishist, and then they see, a really relatable, likable young man, and they're like, oh, it's campy AGP, and it's literally they just go, yeah,
Right.
it's
It's
just
just like a
complete
soft, gentle,
blinders.
sweet, introspective young man. He
Right,
could not
right,
possibly at all be autogynephilic. Eh,
right, right.
you
uh,
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Whereas like often AGPs are quite sensitive, like soft boys, so to speak. Like at least
right,
emotionally, even if not physically, like emotionally,
yeah,
they're a little softer.
yep, yep. Typically, quiet, sensitive.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, as you'd expect a autist to be,
Right.
it's
Yeah,
but they
and an
have this
autist
dichotomy
that
of
like
the.
admires women and like wants
Right,
to incorporate sort of their personality traits into themselves. Like,
right,
of course they're gonna be that way.
right. Yep. Yep, but they just can't see it because they've got the, you know, Genevery.
Uh, yeah. That's yeah. Um, trying to yeah. Is there any other I think we covered the gen do you think we covered the gender critical stuff enough? Like, is there anything else um, you
Nothing
wanna
off.
say about
No,
them?
no,
Okay,
nothing off
yeah,
the top of my head.
I think that's yeah, basically just that they're refusing to see reality, and because they have certain narratives they're trying to uphold because they're 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 an ideological structure that's trying to accomplish a political end, and so it's yeah, it's just I just can't get past how it really does they're trying to portray themselves as the saviors of detransitioners when they can't bring themselves to talk accurately and neutrally about the true causes of what led them to transition.
Yeah.
In effect, they're 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 willing to demonize the category of people that a lot of the detransitioners belong to,
Hmm.
but they make an exception for the detransitioners that adhere to the narrative structure.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It almost seems like I tweeted this that it seems like gay man is like an honorary title they bestow on AGPs who regret their transition. Is what it seems
It,
like.
yep.
I just but it's just so not helpful to the young men about to follow in their footsteps, um, who know they're not gay, but
Right. They'll be like, I love women so much I want to be one, so
yeah,
definitely not gay.
right, right, yep. But yeah, and it's fine. I mean, for the more like culty propagandist like Kelly J. Keene, it's like if that's the angle that you want to take, fair enough. But for the mental health professionals, no, it's not fair enough.
Right. Yeah.
Look,
We hold
yeah,
them to higher standards for good reason.
yeah, yeah. They're the ones who are actually working with this patient population, and yeah, and that's what I kind of have lost my patience um, over is
Yeah. Like I remember when we were at the GenSpec conference, watching Joe Burgos talk, I was I was getting quite frustrated
Yep.
by it.
Yep.
It's
Well,
like it's just meta attraction, Joe. It's meta attraction. They're not gay.
well, and it's like
You
it's
know?
in that talk, he knew that. Like he knew
Yeah.
because he said that they were all autogynephiles, and the talk was the boys who don't masturbate because they're dysphoric about their penises, right? Like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
and they're having these meta attracted encounters with men, and and Joe understood that this was a facet of AGP pseudo bisexuality. He didn't use those words in his talk, but when you asked him the question, he said, "Yeah, they're all AGP." Um, but now he just released an article that was published in Reality's Last Stand, Colin Wright's Substack, saying that there's all these gay men who didn't realize that they were gay until after they had SRS. It's like, and the one person he highlights in that has
Right.
openly admitted to being autogynephilic, and
Like not too openly, but they've said enough where it's like,
yeah.
come on.
Well,
Like
no, and he did make a video saying that yes, it's AGP, but he clearly doesn't understand what it, and he doesn't want to understand it, because he's afraid of it. It's fair enough. He shouldn't have to, but when you on the other breath, he's representing himself as being HSTS. It's like you if you're going to obscure this, what's going on here, own it. But anyway, um, and he also in a later tweet said that he never lied about being AGP or something like that, or it never was deceptive. I can't remember what it says, but he clearly admitted that's the case. And Joe then highlighted him as an example of somebody who realized he was a gay man after SRS. It's like, no, they realize they're gay men because they have to be in order to have a voice in this discourse. And if they publicly
right, like, can
identify
you
themselves.
imagine what the person we're talking about but not naming, could you imagine the pushback that he would get if he publicly came out as AGP from his audience, like how they would react to that? It would
Well,
be so brutal.
right, but he did, like, in the video he said that's what it was, but then at the same time he's saying, but I'm a gay man, so it's clearly like he doesn't understand the typology, and nor do most of his supporters. And so they will understand that confession as being, I'm a gay man who got sucked into the trans sex cult, is how they interpret that, because they don't understand like the fundamental of what's going on here. And I don't know why, but it seems like Joe is pretending to not understand that either, even though in Denver he clearly did understand. Um, and
Yeah,
that's who I've, yeah.
yeah, it is frustrating to I personally yeah, I mean, it wouldn't Joe Burgos' statements about this stuff wouldn't bother me if he didn't have such a large platform, especially getting
Yep.
on Colin Wright's blog. Like, a lot of people see
Yep.
that, and it's just straight up misinformation. It's like, while yes, like, the sort of themes he talks about, like shame and narcissism and stuff, like, those are recurring themes that tend to show up in
Hmm.
various narratives of autogynephilia, but those are secondary and downstream of it.
Right. And
And
he presents it as if autogynephilia is a product of shame, which makes
right,
no sense.
it like, as if you became ashamed and then permanently were most attracted to being a woman. It's like, that's not where sexual orientation comes from.
No, no. And I before I kind of called him out publicly, I did reach out to him privately, and I asked him to tell me how he changed his mind from understanding that that his patients were pseudo bisexual autogynephiles, and he said, "Please just accept that we disagree." I said, "No, I can't. This is too important." So
Yeah,
because he
like,
does,
people
yeah,
are cutting off body parts because of these
right,
feelings, like, it's important.
right. Yep. Yep. And he is not only is he a mental health professional who directly works with this population, except in Denver, he said that he couldn't get through to them. So he quit working with them. It's like, and then he went on to be a trainer for Therapy First on this topic. And so not only is he training other therapists to work with these young men and boys, but he's writing these substects that other therapists that he's not directly working with and parents, etc., are reading and absorbing. And it's so completely unethical, and he won't even explain why he's doing it because he knows better. What is he doing?
Yeah, I I'm yeah, I'm glad we it makes me feel less crazy to see like during the GenSpec controversy when I mostly sat out of it for the most part. Like I made a few tweets, but it's like I was getting dogpiled with so much venomous turf hate where I'm like, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm mostly just gonna like let this blow over because like
yeah,
I also I don't want to make it any harder for GenSpec either. Like I think there's some
right,
things they're doing that are on net good, even though I have some critiques of their inability to just forwardly talk about transgender ideology.
agreed.
I
Yeah,
think they're an important force in terms of moderating the transgender movement's excesses. And
hmm
so I didn't want to make it harder for them. But yeah, that whole controversy just because I was wearing like an outfit that's basically functionally similar to what I'm wearing right now.
right,
Like
right.
basically the same. Um
And it was just like,
yeah.
yeah, it was quite crazy making. Um, I mean, obviously you were the target of it, but just to see all these people who were apparently committed to non-medicalized expressions of gender nonconformity are suddenly
Right,
like
exactly.
tearing their hair out when they see somebody who's yeah uh, wearing typically feminine clothing, and not identifying as a woman. It's like yeah uh,
Yeah, it's like I know I'm a male. I know I'll never there's no amount of surgery that could make me look female. Like that's the roll of the die that I got. And like I don't ask anyone to use pronouns. I was literally following the gender critical rules.
right,
Um just cuz I
right,
mean, I actually that's just it's no different from my everyday life. Like I wasn't doing
right.
anything special. Um but it was just the hypocrisy of I was literally following the accepted gender critical rules of you can dress how you want as long as you like don't go in the women's spaces or like use different pronouns, and I was doing that, but it showed that sort of their animosity towards autogynephiles
hmm
is sort of their deeper commitment rather than to the sort of that liberal free expression commitment.
Yep, yep. For too many, that's true.
Right,
I think
yeah.
yeah, I think there are plenty. Not as many as I would have hoped, who who aren't that way at all. But I think it was. It's like they just they see AGP as the villain of the all the trans issue, and here's somebody saying, "Oh, that's what I am," and there it's like I think there's this visceral reaction of like somebody let the wolf into with the sheep, is I think where like their lizard brains were coming from. But it's just like if you
Yeah.
haven't conceptualized what AGP like how are you this invested in this conversation that you paid the money and traveled to um, uh, Colorado, and you haven't even considered AGP sans the ideology? How how does that
Well, to
happen?
be
Like,
fair,
how do you
people
not
at
consider
the
it?
conference were perfectly
That's
nice to me.
that's
It
true. That's
was
true. Yeah.
yeah. No, like, the
Yeah.
people that are
Well,
actually invested enough in this are often quite liberal and understanding, but it was
yeah, that's
just the
true.
people online were clearly not, um,
Yeah.
and I noticed, like, yeah, a lot of the figureheads for maybe the first half day or so, they, um, were trying to be like, "Hey, why are you attacking
Right.
Phil over this?" But then just it was just so intense, and they're worried for their organization, and so they, like, backed off, and, like, I get it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they they
Fair.
don't they're worried about losing, like, an organization they've put a lot of work into, and, but
Yeah.
yeah, this conversation cannot be avoided, like, autogonophilia needs to be discussed, autoandrophilia needs to be discussed, because even though there's not as much official like formal scientific research, it's really not hard to find anecdotes of autoandrophilic thinking and
Mhm.
sexuality among when you see transmasculine people online talking amongst themselves. It's they're shipping gay characters. They love yaoi. You know, they get gender euphoria from getting called he or from binding or from they'll get aroused from packing. Like there's all these signs that this clearly something analogous to autogynephilia exists. And even if like the official papers aren't in yet, it's just it's so apparent if you just look. Just do like even the just the smallest amount of looking, it's not hard to find.
Yep, yep. It's pretty evidently there, and I would add to that, especially if you're looking for, how AGP would appear in a more femme-brained way, right? So,
Yeah, femme-brained
right.
AGP basically. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then if the Michael Bailey's out there will say, well, then if it's not a paraphilia, it's not uh, uh, the same thing as AGP. But to me, it's so obvious to just the female equivalent is going to look more female typical, and it's going to be less compulsive and overtly sexual, unless in a few cases like the ones that the people that you've had who you interviewed.
Yeah, I
Um,
get some base AAPs on this channel.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, it was interesting.
yeah.
Um, to me, all three of them, they don't seem to have much gender dysphoria. It was all like
Well, I mean,
it's pretty much
Laura
only tied to their
transitioned.
sexuality. She did, but she never really had like she doesn't feel any aversion to her female body or womanhood, being a mother, etc. She has no dysphoria about those things. It was just she's very sexually aroused by having male anatomy and having gay male sex. But it's like so exclusively related to her sexuality. Um, uh, and it sounds like for the others, that's pretty similar. They just have less, younger, less experience in general. But it seemed like very much about sex and sexuality. And I think, like what I was saying in the beginning, I think the ones who immediately identify themselves as being AAP are going to be the ones who have a more male typical and highly sexual experience of it. Um, but I do think those are going to be the minority, and I think the majority of AAPs are going to have an experience closer to mine, which is much less sexual and therefore much more difficult to immediately identify as the female equivalent of AGP because it's going to be much more dulled and more sentimental.
Right.
I
And
suspect. Yeah.
yeah, no, like I lean towards that intuition too. Like when after you read my book before it came out and you said that you've like that you thought AAP was probably more emotional because it's happening in females and sentimental.
Mhm.
I was immediately like, damn, I wish I wrote that in the book
Right.
because it immediately struck me as true because it does seem to be that way. The way that they talk to each other online, it
Yep.
seems that way
Yep.
too.
Yep.
Um, and
But it's
which
just
is
it's
why,
helpful.
yeah.
It's helpful to have those like the Lauras and the Mr. G's and those others who are like, okay, yeah, this is clearly the same thing. But it's just for most, it's not going to look like that. I don't think.
Right. Yeah, and, like, that's why I'm so keen on finding alternative indicators such as, like, phantom anatomy and, gender euphoria, things like that, because I think if clinicians if they asked, like, a female in their clinic about gender euphoria and they said, like, "Yeah, the first time I put on a binder and saw how I looked with my flat chest in a mirror, I got really excited and happy and, like, exuberant." Like, if they if clinicians can know to ask questions like that and know how to interpret those responses,
Hmm.
I think it would go a long way towards identifying, patients as autoandrophilic, even if, they may be uncomfortable talking about sexuality or just, like, haven't noticed any of the sexual signs.
Yep. Yep. I agree.
Um, yeah, it seems like might be a good idea to get wrapping up soon. Are there any like closing thoughts you have?
No, no, I think we covered everything I wanted to go over. Just really glad that you're doing this.
Yeah, I'm glad you came on, and yeah, and I would implore anyone who's listening, if you haven't already um looked at the Gender Dysphoria Alliance's transparency podcast, like Aaron did that for a few years, and they have a extensive back catalog. You could see a lot of the work he's done.
Yeah, we've had a lot of the kind of the OG clinicians on there. We had
The big names.
uh, yep. We got Big Daddy Blanchard himself, and Mike Bailey was on. Had the Gender a Wider Lens, Sasha and Stella on there. Yeah, had some AAPs, some AGPs, bunch of bunch of different experiences of dysphoria and transition and detransition, and so I had some other intellectuals, like your Alice Drager, Lisa Littman. A lot of good stuff over there.
Yeah, basically there's a lot of greatest hits, and you guys
Yeah,
should check out Aaron's back catalog. And he's also got you have a Substack, right?
I do. Yep, Trans Trending. It's just AaronTerrell.substack.
Yeah, and also also yeah, you're on X as Allegation Vein.
Correct. Yep.
Um,
Yep. And you should link to my two Substacks I think
like The
three
Man in
probably.
Me and like those two recent
Yeah,
ones.
yeah.
Yeah.
Two ones I did on AAP called "The Man in Me" and "What Early Sexologists Got Wrong About Female Gender Dysphoria." I think that's what I called it. And then
Okay.
also "What's Going On with the Boys" is take on the Raj D boy phenomenon and why they're actually AGP.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's AGP. Spoiler alert. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks for coming on,
Cool.
Aaron, and
Yeah.
it
Thanks for
is
having me.
now over.